All right, guys, we'll get us started on. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Kiro. It's a blessing to be here. Thanks for having me. How you going? How are you? So I know a few of these people, so please treat me nicely. I know a few too. So I've been asked to talk about cyber safety or online safety for our kids. So we'll go through a few things. Please interrupt me, ask questions. If we can engage, it's a lot better than me just talking here. And for you guys that sort of have experience with these things, like real life examples in your homes or issues that you're having, with the kids or stuff that we talk about that you're concerned about or you don't fully understand, please just jump in, and we'll do sort of a Q&A at the end. So the concept of online safety, I think we need to look at it and treat it as close to the real world as possible. So something like this, if you live in your home and your home is safe and you've got your kids at home, the second you open your front door and the kids go outside, we interact with our kids in a certain way when they leave the home. When they go to school, when they catch a bus, when they're out with their friends, whatever it is our children are doing once they open that front door and leave their home, we interact with them in a certain way. For us to conceptualize the risks of online and to get our head around or, protect our kids or engage with our kids in the best way possible, we need to treat it the exact same. The second the kid opens a laptop or a phone, they're opening a door to a completely different world that we have a lot less control over. So throughout this talk and whenever you guys come across this topic of online safety, try and visualize it in the same way that you would in real life when your kids are outside of your house. So just examples of online activities, and you all know all these apps, I'm sure. So Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, WhatsApp, YouTube, online gaming, all of these sort of avenues, softwares, applications, programs is what we all use to engage online. And they all come with their positives and negatives. But for the purpose of today's talk, we'll unpack the risks to our kids. Using all this stuff comes with certain exposures, and common exposures for our kids, for all of us, but for our kids, a big one's pornography. The access that these children have to pornography is out of this world, and it's a completely different era that our kids are in now compared to us. And I'm 38, 39, so not too old. Even growing up for me in my day and age, we did not have these risks and these concerns like we do now. So for me, even pornography was, magazines, or pornography was, someone at school was sharing around naughty magazines in the playground or something like that. So it was never as accessible as it is now. Fight videos is very common. So I do a lot of school counselling in schools and with young people, and the amount of kids that are attracted to watching fights online is mind-blowing. We're on YouTube and just normal, and Facebook and video reels and all this stuff. There's some obsession with, especially boys, watching people punching on with each other. And that stuff's much more accessible than a lot of the other things. Things like war atrocities, exposure and things being put in our kids' minds that they wouldn't sort of see anywhere else other than online. Gruesome pictures, everything that happens overseas, wars, ISIS, beheadings, all this kind of stuff that our kids are exposed to the second they get onto their phone or on their laptop. Alongside that, radicalization. I've been involved, the influence for our kids these days in regards to concepts that are not our concepts. The influence from outside, from friends, from society in general, and then it's exacerbated the second they go online. When they hear something or exposed to something, then they go online and they're exposed to it even more and they visualize it, it compounds. Tips on how to self-harm. Self-harm is a big problem amongst our youth. Cutting themselves for various reasons, but self-harm, a lot of it is superficial. It's not suicide attempts, but it's a distraction from whatever it is that's going on and harming themselves. Very, very common. It's also like it's not a cult, but it's like they they learn from each other. It's a trend, exactly right. So kids hear about self-harm from other kids, and they share with each other in the playground, or girls, will talk to each other, and then it becomes a trend where kids will do it because other kids are doing it, or they want to try it, or what's the fascination with self-harm? Exactly right, and they copy each other, so it becomes like a trend, yeah? Not necessarily a suicide attempt. Self-harm is different. Yes, you copy it, exactly right. That's exactly right. How to engage in criminal behaviour. So there is stuff online to teach kids how to engage in criminal behaviour, how to make weapons, how to steal, how to get away with things. Knowing the law, so to learn how to get around the law, okay? Buying drugs. Again, in my day and age, to get drugs, you had to know someone, you had to go somewhere, there had to be a connection, you had to have physical money in your pocket. Acquiring drugs when I was growing up was a lot harder than now. And the amount of apps, the amount of code words, the amount of underground access to drugs that kids have online, even delivered, like drugs being delivered to kids or arranging to meet places, blah, blah, blah. It's a real concern. The other one's gambling. So online gambling, especially for young kids, it's becoming much more of a trend. Kids having access to their bank accounts, older kids, teenagers, having online banking and things like that opens the door for online gambling. Again, a much bigger risk and different to when we were growing up. If I wanted to gamble, I had to go to a club, I had to go to a poker machine, I had to be 18 to get in. I didn't have access to gambling. We didn't have access to gambling growing up like our kids do these days. So all of these are the concerns, I guess, the exposure. The second our kids open their laptop or phone, all of this stuff they're able to access in one way or another. So something like parental control. So I'm no IT expert, and I really think on the topic of cyber security, we should probably, maybe I'll speak to Kat or to Sarah, to organise another session, bringing in an IT person, and I've done it before and it's worked really well, where they dig deeper into and educate you guys on exactly what parental controls are out there, the different ways where you can sort of actively control or monitor what's happening on your kids' devices. There's some phones, and depending on the phone and depending on the device that you have built-in controls in the actual settings of the device. Some are free online that you can download, and other ones more sort of high-tech ones that you can purchase. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but it is important as much as we can to get our head across what we have access to in regards to parental controls that can help us. In saying that though, be mindful that don't have a false sense of security where if you think you've activated the parental controls on your phone, that you're safe and you give more freedom, or you're not, as conscious, with your kids and their devices because you put the parental controls. A lot of the older kids can get around the parental controls, and the cyber criminals and what's out there also make it easy for them to get around parental controls to still access your kids or to provide information. So it's good, but it doesn't replace diligence. It doesn't replace us as parents controlling and being aware of what our kids are doing. Also, things like we can sync our own devices with our kids. So monitoring what they're doing, seeing how much time they're spending on there. A lot of our phones these days, we're actually able to sync where we can see from our own devices what our kids are doing. And we can control it to a certain extent. I know friends of mine that, their internet, all the devices within their family are shared on one internet, and they can deactivate internet usage from their kids' phones. So things like that we're able to do in this day and age. It's just a matter of understanding it, getting to know about it, or having someone help us to do all this stuff. So we'll see what we can do for parental controls moving forward with you guys, but I think it's very useful for us to get our head around this stuff as much as we can. Social media. So there are positives to social media. It's not all bad. And as you guys know, and everyone here I'm sure is on social media, as am I, there are positives. And things like communicating with family and friends, remaining up to date, getting in touch with people, relatives overseas, things like that. There's a lot of positives. For young people, it allows them for self-expression. They can discover themselves. They can discover their strengths, their weaknesses. They can, can help them figure out things for themselves, what they like, what they're good at, things like that. self-identity as well, again, to get to know themselves and to grow the positive resources and positive interactions online. It does open up a world for them that can be positive. Learning, obviously education, research, assignments, school. So there's even spiritual life, and for us as well, on our social media, we can access, sayings of the church fathers and, spiritual quotes and biblical verses. There's a lot of positives online, but obviously the negatives as well. So for our kids, and lower risk negatives, not so much the stuff we'll get to, the online, risk-taking behavior and predatory behavior and all that, but the lower end stuff, something like distracting our kids, the amount of children that are distracted because of social media, where they don't study, they don't do their chores, they don't live their life the way they should be because of the distraction of being online. Disrupting sleep. I counsel kids that don't sleep. They sleep during the day, they don't go to school because they're gaming all night. And it's so common. It's very, very common. Cyberbullying is a huge one. Again, for us growing up, if we were bullied, a lot of the time it was at school, in the playground, or in the classroom. Now it's, again, the second they open their phone, the exposure to them being bullied, them being harassed, is huge. Unrealistic views of their friends' lives, and we even see this as adults. What people post on social media for young people, what they see of their friends and the lives that their friends lead, and what they see from pictures and Snapchats and all that, gives them a false sense of reality, and that can really impact their mental health. So, their lives, whatever they're struggling with, what happens in their own home, they look at their friends on social media and everything's fantastic and everything's rosy and everything's positive. And it really, really distorts their sense of reality and really impacts their mental health. Big one is loss of social skills. So for kids, and depending on what age, but for kids to develop and meet their milestones, social interaction is a huge part of development for a child. Even as, babies, and we talk about, sending them to childcare and things like that. It's all about social skills and social development and them developing and growing and meeting milestones. Online activity really, really impacts that significantly because they're not utilizing and they're not learning the skills they need to live in a real world, interacting with other humans, and it's all like this, and it impacts development depending on the age, and if they miss certain developmental milestones, learning skills to interact with people, problem solve, to share, to confront, to converse, communication, to read body language, all of these things that's vital for our kids, they don't get behind a screen. Peer pressure is another big one. Kids do things online that they will never do in person. Their behavior and their decision making and the way they conduct themselves is for a lot of kids is very different compared to what they're willing to do or the risk they're willing to take in person. And a lot of it comes from peer pressure and what their friends are doing online and what's cool to do online and what the trend is online. Kids, will be much more inclined to be peer pressured and behave in a way that they wouldn't do it face to face. Negative attention. So fishing for likes. So a lot of kids, because of self-esteem, because of confidence, because of vulnerabilities, whatever it is, again, they'll behave in a way online that they won't in person to get attention, to get likes, to get interaction. They don't get it face-to-face, or they've got confidence issues, but they're much more confident behind a screen, and that comes with risks. Like we said, risk-taking behavior that they wouldn't normally do. And online grooming is a big one, and probably the highest risk one, which comes with pretty much the most harm if worst case scenario happens and if kids get caught up in this. It's really, really concerning and dangerous. So online grooming is, sorry, that's not the best picture, but it's just that. It's predators online. That is predator. Well done. So it's online predators, essentially. So it's people online intentionally wanting to cause harm to a child, and they use online to engage with that child. And these slides, I show them to kids. I just thought I'd throw them in there, just for the purpose of highlighting what I'm talking about. But to kids, when I give this talk to kids and I tell them, girls are chatting online and a friend of a friend or someone sends them a friend request online and they start talking. How old are you? I'm 15. No way, I'm 15 too. What school do you go to? I go to this school. Oh, no way, I go to this school. What do you play sport? Yes, blah, blah, blah. and this is who they think they're talking to. And the same with the guys, nice girl, same age, same interests. And this is a lot of the time for predators that are out there, and we all know this, and you see it in the news, and this is not news to any of us. This is how online predators work. Again, a lot easier and opens a completely different door than in reality. Because in reality, these predators, they are who they are. It's very hard for them, unless they kidnap, it's very hard for them to engage a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old physically. The kids won't do that. They know stranger danger, that they wouldn't behave like that. Whereas online, it opens all these new possibilities for these creeps to behave in that way online. And kids are dumb. Online, our kids are dumb. They're not as smart as they are face-to-face. So kids, are much easier to manipulate online than face-to-face. Kids will believe things online. Even adults, we believe things. How much fake news goes around, how much fake media articles, how much information we get online that we believe, and then we later find out that is not true. A lot harder for kids to decipher between what's true and what's real and what's not online. Something called ghost apps. Have you guys ever heard of ghost apps? So this was new to me as well. So ghost apps are apps that look like apps, but they're not. And it all started, the first ghost app was a calculator app. So and that's the icon that was on the phone, is a calculator app. And you open it and calculator was there. But then you keep your finger for 3 seconds on the thing, and then it asks for a pin. You put your pin in, and then it opens up this vault. All this other balawi, pictures and pornography and chat rooms and. And since that, there's heaps more of them now called ghost apps. So even for us as parents, we take our kids' phone and we go through their apps. It appears normal. We'll open some of the apps. It may appear normal. A lot harder to track, but just for us to know that this stuff is out there, even for us, don't think just based on what you see, that's the reality of what your child's doing online. Geotagging photos. Do you guys know what geotagging is? And again, this was new to me as well. I learned a lot doing this presentation, actually. So geotagging is a software on the phone, and apparently most phones, by default, geotagging is on. So when we take pictures, so it's automatically enabled. So the pictures that we take digitally details the GPS coordinates, the location, the date, and the time of when the picture was taken. So if a kid takes a picture, a selfie at home or with their friends, whatever, and geotagging is on, and then they post it online or they share it, people can access where that child took that picture, the GPS coordinates, and then putting that into Google Earth or Maps, they can pinpoint exactly where the kid is, the house, the school, wherever they are, and the date the picture was taken and the time of day that it was taken. And all those details are in this geotagging software that comes standard with most devices. So again, something to be aware of, and IT-wise, there's a way to go in our phones and to turn that off, to not enable that. And the other concern for this is us, with our social media use, is, we take pictures of our kids, we'll post on Facebook and Instagram, and a lot of us use these same platforms, and we have to be careful. And this next point of our internet usage, and mainly when our kids are a bit older, our internet usage could be linked with their internet usage. So if they're on Facebook and they got friend request, or someone's contacted them and they're chatting on Messenger with someone and they're befriending someone that they don't know or they believe to be whoever, if we take pictures of our kids and we post them online and we tag our kids, that connection is then linked with whoever they're interacting with. So we could be exposing or putting our kids at risk without even knowing it. And we're doing it innocently. We're just taking pictures of our kids and posting so our relatives in Egypt can see and whatever. But unknowingly, we could be exposing or connecting our kids to a lot of risk based on their online activity that's connected to ours. So something like this geotagging for us to be aware of. Sexting and nudes. This is a musiba, and it's very, very common. And I know this because I'm exposed to it maybe a lot more than a lot of you. So I work in the schools. I do a lot of youth counselling, school counselling. I work in the Coptic schools at St. Mary's in Bexley and Rockdale. I've got my own Christian counselling practice, so I do a lot of counselling with our youth, Coptic youth. So I'm exposed to a lot of this stuff that maybe the average person is not aware of. And I can tell you firsthand from my experience, this stuff is very common for us, for our Coptic kids, in our Coptic schools, in our Sunday schools, our children, our nephews, our nieces. This stuff is it's common. It's more common than it should be. So something like sexting and sending nudes is sending or receiving sexually explicit photos, boys or girls. A lot of the time, girls tend to get caught up in this stuff, but it applies to both. The other risk with something like this that a lot of people are unaware of is legal implications. And I say this to a lot of young people, especially teenagers, where if you take a picture of yourself, a nude or a sexually explicit picture, and you're under 18, you're at risk of being charged under state laws and New South Wales laws, and that's considered creating child pornography if you're under 18. If a friend shares a nude that a girl sent him in a group and a young person forwards that on, they could get charged with distribution of child pornography if the child in that photo is under 18. And the third one is if someone gets sent a photo, a young person gets sent a photo and has it in their phone, they can get done for possession, having possession of child abuse pornography or material in their phone. So risks like these that we don't even think about or we don't even know about. And the biggest issue with this stuff for us as parents, we think and believe, and we do to a certain extent, we say to ourselves, we know our kids. I know my daughter. I know my son. They're not perfect, but they wouldn't do this stuff. That's not them. They wouldn't behave like this. And there's nothing to suggest that they will. And the issue with this stuff is, and studies will show, this stuff isn't because of what we call delinquent behavior. It's not because a kid is naughty or bad or sexualized that they'll engage in this behavior. So our kids may be good kids and they would never dare to do anything like this according to our knowledge. But a lot of this stuff, and studies will show, the reason kids do this is because of vulnerabilities, not bad behavior, not because they're naughty. So when they're vulnerable, when they're being taken advantage of, when they're being manipulated, when they're being peer pressured, when they're being blackmailed, it will cause them to do this stuff that they wouldn't normally do. So a typical scenario is a girl, young girl, low self-esteem, low self-confidence, doesn't really feel good about herself, her body image, she doesn't like the way she looks, she thinks she's a bit overweight, whatever. And she's getting attention from a guy at school, someone she knows, a friend. She may like him. They may be together, dating, I don't know. And taking advantage of that girl and her vulnerability and her low self-esteem and her low self-confidence will make her do some of this stuff that she wouldn't normally do. She trusts him, it's her boyfriend, he's pressuring her, she feels good about herself because he's taken an interest in how she looks, and she can send this stuff. So please don't think or assume that because we know our kids that they're not at risk of doing this stuff because we've raised them well and they're good kids. All of our kids are, and we raise our kids the best we can, and not one of us would think that any of our children will do this. But again, they don't do it because they're naughty or bad. They do it for other reasons, and a lot of the time it's not out of their control, but there's factors impacting them and why they do certain things. And again, like we said before, kids doing this stuff and not doing it in person. So the online world is so different to the real world. Most of our kids will never expose themselves in front of anyone. They will never do that. Even if they're being peer pressured, even if they're in their playground, even if they're with whoever, they would never expose themselves. But a lot of the ones that won't expose themselves in real life could be inclined to doing stuff like this online. Blackmail.
That's online forever, and the child may then see no other way to end it than to commit suicide.
100%, and I'll get to that, but 100%. And I'll put the picture of Snapchat, so this is a common one. And this is, again, part of the misinformation that people have. Who has Snapchat here? Anyone have Snapchat? No one has Snapchat? You got Snapchat? I don't have Snapchat, but I know about Snapchat. So apparently, Snapchat, people have this false sense of safety with Snapchat because Snapchat was designed to send pictures for like 10, 12 seconds and then it gets deleted. They're what they call self-destructs. So you take a picture on Snapchat and you send it to whoever, that when they open it, it comes up on their phone and you can set the time, I think 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then the photo self-destructs and is no longer on Snapchat. And that's the belief. The problem with that is if you're IT minded, there is a way, I don't know how, but there is a way to retrieve pictures from Snapchat. The other workaround that now everyone does is you take a screenshot in that 5 or 7 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever. So even though kids think they're safeguarded, they're not. Something like Snapchat comes up on their phone, they take a quick screenshot, that person's got that picture. It doesn't self-destruct, doesn't get deleted, doesn't go anywhere, and that person, whatever was sent, the person has that with them. And they can do what they want. So misconceptions as well for these kids, thinking they know or thinking they've minimized the risk because they're sending it on Snapchat, they're not sending it on Messenger, things like that, again, is a real risk. Like Michael was saying, this is the problem that we need to understand and our kids need to understand. The second you put something online, you are no longer the owner of that. If you voluntarily send something to someone on WhatsApp or Messenger or Snapchat or whatever, you are giving up your rights, the ownership of that picture or of that message or whatever. And that person can do whatever they like with it, and that picture can end up wherever it ends up. People can hack people's phones and people's laptops and access stuff that was never meant for that person. And this is the concept that we all need to, even for us as adults, we need to understand. The second we post anything online, it's not ours anymore. And then you don't know where it's going to go. You don't know who they're going to send it to. You don't know what WhatsApp group that person's going to share that picture with to his friends. You don't know what girlfriends are just going to send it to the one friend that they really trust and it's their best friend and they know everything, and I'm just going to share this because I need, to talk to them about it or whatever. So as a concept, we need to understand that we post something online, be prepared for it to go anywhere and everywhere. And like Michael said, the risk with that as well, so when things happen like that, if a young person sends something and it goes everywhere, they're no longer in control. The impact on that young person is huge. And the risk for them to be blackmailed. And then it's a spiral. So I know with sexting, they'll send a sext to someone and that person has it. That nude picture or that sext is used to blackmail that person to sending more and more and more. And what's the kid going to do? If you don't send it, I'm going to share it around. And they're stuck. And again, this behavior, not because the kid's bad, not because they're naughty, not because they got sexualized behavior. It's because they're vulnerable and they're put in a very difficult position that they can't get out of, and it just spirals down. Yeah. Good question. I'll get to the tips. Tips, not bulletproof, but there are things that we can do. But yeah, I'll get to that. So just the impacts on mental health. So there are a million studies out there. There's a lot of information out there, and I think we should all, as much as we can, sort of educate ourselves on this stuff. Something like this study in 2020, 45% of 12 to 17-year-olds are either struggling with depression, anxiety, or some sort of mental health issue directly impacted by the use of social media. So these studies, understanding this cohort of children and their depression, anxiety, whatever mental health issue they had, digging a bit deeper, all drew back to some extent their use of social media, or the social media was a catalyst for something that they experienced. Again, the impact of social media on self-harm and cutting and suicide ideation and suicide attempts, and all of this stuff is much more impactful on our kids today than when it was for us, when all of this stuff was still there. Bullying was still there, pornography was still there, addiction was still there, but it was not as accessible. Poor body image, exposure to harmful things such as alcohol and other drugs, dangerous ideas, concepts and behaviours. So all this stuff we discuss. Cyberbullying, again, fear of missing out. So kids, on their mental health, see themselves as, being disadvantaged in a way, or not as fortunate. Their friends are doing all this stuff, their parents may have more money, they're going on nicer holidays, they've got nicer houses, nicer cars, whatever it is they're posting, where they're going, what they're doing, freedom that they may have, friends, posting pictures of them being out at night or being at parties or whatever, and kids feeling that they're missing out or they're disadvantaged some way, which all of this stuff impacts our kids' mental health, and all of this stuff is the exposure that the kids have from being online. So, how can we protect our kids? So, the first thing I think a lot of us may not do or may not do well is the way we discipline our kids, or the way we, put together how we're going to keep our kids safe and protect them and ensure they're good kids. And so, for a lot of us as parents, and I think maybe even culturally for us as Egyptians, we tend to put rules for our kids and tell our kids the way things are, and what they can and can't do, and punishments here and there. And research and I guess behavior management and interacting with our children and raising our children, a much more effective way is involving them in the process, rather than sitting them down and telling them this is the rules, you can use your phone from this time to this time, or only this long each week, and weekends you can have it at rather than doing that, engaging your child in that process in an age appropriate way. Of course, 2 and 3 year olds is different to 15-year-olds, but as much as we can to engage with our kids and interact with our kids, as opposed to just telling our kids how it is. And if we do it like that, if they're involved or they've got some part of the decision making, they're much more inclined to stick to it. If I sit down with my teenager and discuss and see what he thinks is fair, tell him what I think is fair, do some negotiation, we compromise, we explain why this is risky or why I can't let them do what they want, but let's agree on something. If that process happens, then the child's much more inclined to stick to the agreement and the rules, because they're a part of it and they helped come up with it and they agreed on it, and it's not a surprise to them and they don't think it's unfair. So if we involve them in the process, we've got a better chance of implementing it and the kids sticking to it, because they were part of it, as opposed to us just dictating to our kids. Something like location of the screen use, and this is very important. Basic rules like how they use their devices. Something like in the bedroom, before they go to bed, or with the door closed, when they've got full freedom to access and do what they want online, not a good idea, regardless of the age, more so even for the older kids. So having basic rules around things like this, where they can use your screen and go online and have social media and have Facebook and do all this stuff. But we can, as much as we can, minimize the risk posed to the kids. And something like us being accessible, seeing what our kids are doing in a common area, in the living room, in the kitchen, wherever, having the door open, whatever, that if we need to, we can monitor what the kids are looking at and what they're watching. Even something like, a lot of kids will say they're studying, and we think they're studying. So it's good. Thank God my kid's in his room with his door closed, studying, HSC band, exams, and my kid's going to be a doctor, and I trust that they're studying. They're not studying at all. So even something like that, have it accessible so you can see what your kid's studying. Did you have a question? So yeah, programs, I know Nafsi, I'm not very good with the IT side of things. Like I said, for الأول, I think it will be beneficial if someone comes and does a workshop, actual software and programs, and put it up there. Even we did a course, not me, but I got someone who's very good with this stuff to do a course at another church and I talked to Abuna, maybe some of the servants, where we did an IT workshop where all the parents brought in their devices. So whether it's their phone or their iPad or whatever, and they all connected to the church's Wi-Fi, and this person showed them, and they downloaded and they installed software on their phones, and they were taught how to use it. For something like that, if it would be beneficial, maybe we can organize something like that, practical workshop, to show you guys what's available and how to use this software to protect our kids. In saying that as well, I think as the kids get older, and the last point of this, I'll expand on it more, but we need to accept that we're never going to have 100% control of our kids, especially as they grow older. You can pay $100 a month for parental control. You can sit your kid in the living room when they use their phone. You can do all this stuff, and still you're never going to have 100% control of your child, especially when they're not in your presence. If they've got a phone, if they're 16 and they've got their own phone and they're outside of the house, parental control, no parental control, you're not going to have the control that you want. And this is something we have to accept. And I'll talk about that more as we go through. Monitor your child's accounts. Again, we talked about the parental controls. Things like having a balance for your children, even if we're controlling their devices and we're linked and we're synced and we can see what they're doing, balancing their life is very important. The amount of time they spend on the screen compared to the amount of time they're outdoors and doing other human things that we all should be doing anyway. So not just monitoring our children's social media use, but monitoring the balance, their overall life and their balance of how much time they spend online, even if it's controlled, even if you have full control, how much time they spend online and how much time they're not online and doing other things. Again, like we said, for their development, for their holistic, their whole life, their mind, body and spirit, everything needs to be balanced. Again, something I don't think a lot of us may not do that well is talking to our kids, educating them, getting them to understand it's not just yes and no. No, you're not allowed on this, or no, you can only have half an hour. It's explaining to them why. And I think it's very important for us, as much as we can, to educate ourselves so we can interact with our children better. Just because we're older and just because technology is advancing, we can't claim ignorance and then expect things to go well with our kids. If we don't know what they're looking at, if we don't know what they're exposed to, if we don't know the reasons why we're saying no, if we don't know why we're saying only 1 hour, if we don't know why we're saying this app you can, this app you can't, then our kids are not going to buy it. So I think for us, if they see us as educated, if what we're saying makes sense, if what we're saying is true and correct, and if we're challenging them in a way that they'll buy, then we're in a better place for that interaction to go well. If they're a lot smarter than us and we don't know what we're talking about and we've got no idea and they're manipulating us, then we've got no control over what they're doing.
It's important for that conversation to be had as well.
100%. And again, our kids know things that we didn't know at that age. My kids are 7 and 9. They know a lot more than what I knew at 7 and 9. A lot more. Twice as much more. So 100%. And culturally for us, this stuff is difficult for us, I think, as Copts, as Egyptians. Some of these topics culturally, we don't talk about publicly, and we'd rather maybe not bring up, or it's uncomfortable to speak about. And that's for us culturally. Growing up, I know my parents growing up in Egypt, a lot of this stuff wasn't discussed. My mum was saying when she grew up, something even like sex education wasn't taught at school. So culturally for us, there is that barrier there. And I think we have to accept the exposure that our kids have these days, the era that they live in, the online world, everything that they're facing now is different to us. We have to adapt. We have to meet them where they're at. So something like taboo topics, uncomfortable discussions, awkwardness, things like that, we need to figure out a way around it because these discussions have to happen.
Can I ask, how do you know what age to have those discussions? Given that they're exposed to this stuff a lot,
Yep.
earlier than we were, how do you identify
Yep.
without the risk of exposing them to it early?
Good question. So, and this is, I'm going to give you a very grey answer, okay? This stuff is very case-by-case scenario, first of all. So it's very dangerous to put ages and group people in ages because kids develop differently. And you don't want to, trying to do a good thing, trying to talk to your kid, trying to educate them, you don't want to introduce something in their mind that they haven't been exposed to yet. They will later, but they haven't yet. So even though we're trying to do the right thing, talking to kids about some of these dangers or sexting and they don't even know what sexting is, we could be introducing something to them that we don't want to. So it's very, very case-by-case scenario. I'll go a bit back. With this whole topic, a big part of it comes down to the relationship we have with our children. And I know for those that have teenagers now and they're already 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, you know, khalas, the relationship's there. If it's good, it's good. If it's not, it's a bit trickier to sort of fix. But a lot of this stuff is dependent on the relationship we have with our children. If we have a good relationship with our children, if we have good communication with our children, if our children trust us, if our children can come and talk to us about things where we're not going to zah and you're grounded and ma fish telephone and then we're in a much better position to deal with them when things go wrong or to have these discussions with them. If we don't have that relationship with our kids, they're not going to want to talk to us about sex or about the risks. I know, Mum, I know, Dad, thanks very much. Yeah, no, I've got it, thanks. They're not going to want to engage with us. So before all this, when our kids are young and growing up, it's very, very important that we focus on our relationship with them. So come the time we need to have a difficult discussion or we need to challenge them on something or we need to have an awkward conversation, we're in a better position to do that because the relationship's there. We can't expect our kids to, sit down and talk to us and hear us and compromise with us and accept that, these rules, whatever, if we're not investing that time in that relationship. And that's a whole other topic.
Also, I would just treat it as from 18 onwards or I think 16 might be a bit too young. Like, they'll probably already know about it. They probably have, but they're probably not ready to
So,
do about it.
well, a lot of, even something like that, in our society, if you look at the terms and conditions for a lot of these apps, most of them do not recommend children less than 13 to have these apps. So by social standards and by terms and conditions and legalities for a lot of these apps, it's 13, not 16 or 18.
What's the legal age of carnal knowledge? Like legally?
Consent, 16. Yep. Consent, legal age for consent is 16. But something like this, and our kids much younger than 16 are exposed to a lot of this stuff. A lot younger than 16.
At school, we had kids that were, sleeping with each other way before, in year 8,
Yep.
7,
Yep.
8.
And kids having their own phones is getting younger. And kids, being exposed to this stuff by other friends' phones when they go to their house on the holidays, whatever, is a lot younger. So I guess we can't be naive. And case by case scenario, you know your child, you know what they're up to, you know the friends that they have. If you do have a good relationship with your child where they talk to you and they come to you and tell you what's happening at school and what their friend said, a lot of the kids ask questions. I've got parents where they'll say the kid came home from school one day and said, "Hey, Mum, what's a lesbian?" And they've heard it in the playground. So they've been exposed, they've been introduced. This whole narrative these days about transgender and love is love and gay and mish gay, it's so everywhere. Even driving here from my house this morning, I live in Padstow Heights, driving on Henry Lawson Drive, there was rainbow flags on the poles, random. No slogan, no nothing, just flags. Every light pole on Henry Lawson Drive had the rainbow flag on there for no reason, nothing at all. So the exposure to our kids, we can't be naive to think it's only when they get older. They're exposed to so much now. So to answer your question, you know your child.
Can I just say, I'm a primary school teacher, and there are students in 5 and 6 that are successful. It's happening in primary schools. But I work in a public school. But I just want you to know that this doesn't happen later in education. It's happening. With 8 and up, they're exposed to this.
Yep. And I've had the same experience. Again, I do school counselling, sexting, self-harm, all of this stuff. Our kids know about it much younger, much younger. But again, you know your child better than anyone. You know your gut better than anyone. If you know of or you're concerned that your kids are exposed to something, have a discussion with them, or consult, or speak to other people. Speak to your friends who are parents. Speak to your confession father. Speak to a Sunday school servant. None of us have all the answers, but we do what we can. Consult. Get someone else's idea. Ask your sister, hey, I'm thinking of talking to my child about this. Do you think it's a good idea? Use other people. A lot of the time, kids won't listen to us as their parents. My kids won't listen to me, but they'll listen to my brother. I can say the exact same thing, word for word, and they won't listen to me, but they'll listen to uncle or abuna or someone else. So be savvy. If you need to do something or you need to take a certain action, you figure out the best way to do it, however you choose to do it. But please, all of us, we need to not be naive to think that our kids are not exposed to this stuff or they're not doing this stuff. Yeah, look, yeah. um, we'll talk after. We'll talk. Like,
I think that practicing comes down to the relationship you have with the child, and that there is not one generic thing that applies to every child. So, like 100%, you need to be open, talk to them, and they cannot be like naive because we are surrounded with, everything that's happening in the community, whether it's, as we say, love is love, the rainbow colours, it's just a normal thing. And I mean, we're exposed to it. Whether you go to a cafe or a restaurant, you have a transgender waiter or waitress. My daughter the other day was telling me, the cafe that I go to every now and then, you don't know if this person has decided to be female today or male today. So it doesn't matter what age our child is, they are exposed to it. So it does come down to the relationship you have with your child and talking to them on a regular basis. Even though, like, I've got both my high schoolers who I'm more, not so much concerned with my daughter because she's 16 and, like, I'm not going to say, like, she knows all this, but as you're saying, yes, our kids are good, okay, and they know, a lot of them know the right from wrong, or we like to think that, but you still need to, just pop in, see what they're doing, see what they're up to, and, like, in terms of red flags, I have my daughter has come to me and told me, Manuel, this is actually this. I like to coach him, gone to him and told him, this is not happening. And it's peer pressure. At the end of the day, it is also peer pressure, so you just have to be open. The doors need to be
100%. 100%. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's always
Yep.
peer pressure. Peer
Like,
pressure
you gotta
is
understand, like, as well, like, when a guy hits that age, like, his hormones are going crazy.
and that's normal. You can't hide that from males and females.
Yeah, that's right.
That's
Yeah,
normal.
it's not
That's
necessarily
normal.
peer
Growing up, it's just the right way, the right steps to be taken.
Look, I agree. And I think, look, for red flags as such, I'll say 3 things in regards to red flags. 1, go off what your child gives you. So if your child asks a question, if your child makes a comment, if your child uses certain language or talks about a certain concept, so as much as you can, be led by the child, and that will guide you to not introduce something too early or to not expose them to something, well intended as you are. Be led by them. So play off whatever they give you. If they ask you a question, if you hear a comment, if you hear certain language, if they make reference to something that you think, how do they know this, or what do they mean, or be led by them is the first thing. The second thing, you all know your children better than anyone, and you know what we call a baseline. So we all know our kids and what their baseline is, what their normal level of functioning is, what their normal level of emotional maturity they have, their moods, blah, blah, blah. You know your kids. So always measure against that baseline. If you start to see your kid away from that baseline or moving further away from the way they normally are, in their emotion, in their mood, in their behavior, in their level of tolerance, in their how sensitive they are, in their reactions. Anything like that you start to notice, that they're moving away from their baseline, pay more attention to it. And if you can put it down to certain things, if they just come off their screen time and their mood is different, or they've had an interaction online with someone, or they've been chatting to someone, try and be investigative in a way, Try and put things together. If you notice your child is becoming different or moving away from their baseline and you can connect it to something specific, put those two things together and figure out the way you're going to respond. The third thing to look out for is, and similar to them being away from their baseline, the impact that this stuff has on them. So again, if they're functioning in a certain way, and the impact on their sleep, the impact on their concentration, their impact on how they feel, their impact on their capacity to behave or to engage or to respond. So whatever it is they're doing, look at how it's impacting their life. And if it's impacting in a negative way, if it's impacting in a concerning way, then you need to pay attention to that. If it's impacting them positively, then fantastic. That's great. So be led by the child, play off what they give you, use that as a guide. Be conscious of their baseline and how far or close they are to their baseline, and pay attention to the impact this stuff has on them, and that'll help you figure out the best way forward with your kids.
I think what you said before was really important, that the child needs to understand that they need to come to you about anything and not be told off.
Yep.
Like if they're coming to you with a hard topic, like they gotta not expect a harsh reaction, otherwise they'll never come to you.
100%.
Then you'll always be in the dark.
100%.
You need to be totally open and accepting of whatever comes.
100%. And that responsibility is on us. If our kids come to us and we react bad, don't be upset when they don't come to us again. 100%.
That's fair enough. I'll just agree with you.
Yep.
That's fair enough.
And that's our responsibility.
We're gonna go on before it else.
Yep.
That's mostly on.
Yeah.
You were saying, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
You were saying before educating ourselves. Not because we are older and people with parents, we can always I learn from my kids, and it's like I learn from people that are younger than me, and that's like an advantage for me that I see something different.
Yep.
So no matter what age you are,
Yep.
get this to parents.
100%. And that leads on to point 7. And we're all guilty of this. And this is really important. We need to be conscious of our own social media use. We can't tell the kids, get off the phone, don't be on the phone. You only get to go on the phone for 20 minutes, when every time they look at us, we're on our phone. And another thing that I see with parents a lot that we do, we think we're justified in being on our phones or laptops or screens because of what we're doing on it. So because we're replying to work emails, or because we're, arranging something for the kids with another parent, or because we have to post on our social media for work, or whatever it is, we think we're justified being on our screen because of the content and what we're doing. But to the kids, we're not. They don't care. They don't care what we're doing. Or that's not going through the kids' head. Oh, mum and dad are always on their phone, but it's okay because they're doing work and they need to provide for us. And if they weren't doing work, we wouldn't have a nice life, so I'll let them be on there. Kids, that's not how their brain works. They see you on your phone and you're spending your whole life telling them to get off their phone. So we need to understand from the kids' perspective. So if we're going to do our best to manage this whole online thing with our kids, we need to be conscious of what we're doing. Every time the kid looks at us and we're on Facebook, And then we're telling them, no, you're not having a Facebook account, or Facebook's not good, or be careful what you do online, and we're on Instagram, and we're on blah, blah, blah. So we need to be conscious of that. Spend time with the kid. So this one I think is very important for us to focus on. When our kids are younger, we have much more control of what they do. My kids are 7 and 9. I can turn off the Wi-Fi. They don't have their own phones. I can control how long they're on. When I say turn the TV off, turn it off. If they don't, I pull the plug, go to your room, whatever I want, because they're young. I have much more control of my children because they're younger. As my kids get older, I've got less control. They'll tell me to get stuffed. They'll go out and do what they want without me even knowing. And that's just natural. As our kids get older, we have less control of them. So this concept, yes, we can have more control when they're younger. When they get older, we just have to have done a good enough job, or as best as we can, leading up to them, to educate them and to give them the skills and the common sense and the respect and the responsibility to make their own decisions. Because when they're 15, 16, 17, you're not going to have control over your child. They're going to be out. They're going to catch public transport. Their friends got their Ps and they're going to pick them up and go wherever they want to go. They're going to have their own phone. They don't need to use your phone anymore. They can get their own internet plan, prepaid, whatever. You're not going to have control over your children. 100%. 100%. It needs to start earlier. But I'm saying all you've got to rely on when they're older is the education that 100% you should have been giving them and continue to give them when they're older. Because parental controls are not going to work when your kid's 16. They're not going to have a bar of it.
Because I'm instilling a healthy level of fear of the internet
Yep.
to my kids.
A healthy level of fear. Yeah. Yeah, but
Are you really talking to, a child? How do you know that,
Yep.
little things like that?
and
That's the question.
and again, you and again, like we said before, you need to be educated to educate your children. Your children should not have one up on you with this stuff. So you need to know you need to know the risks. You need to show them that what you're saying is true and it is a risk. You need to educate yourself. You need to educate yourself because they're not going to take you seriously. So there you go. Educate yourself. And if your children are impressed by your knowledge, they'll be more inclined to listen to you. If your children know or think, yeah, my mum and dad know what they're talking about, or they go off and research themselves and think, oh yeah, mum and dad were right, you'll earn their respect. They'll take what you say more seriously. If you know what you're talking about, if you're educated, if you challenge them, and you're on even playing field, they know a lot, you know a lot, you've got a much better chance at engaging with them in a better way than if they just think you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. So again, as much as we can, guys, with this whole topic, you would not let your kid go outside and not know where they're going. You ask who you're with, what time are you going to be back, what are you going to eat, where are you going to go. We do not let our kids go outside that front door without knowing. And we need to, the concept is the exact same, as much as we can. And we educate our kids. We tell them about stranger danger. They know to not approach strangers in the street. They know not to take lollies from an old man. They know not to talk, they know not to walk off with this person to go show them whatever. We educate our kids when we send them off into the world. And it's the exact same thing online. It's a lot harder, but the concept is the exact same.
Apparently the majority of police resources is just on finding online offenders. That's how big of an issue it is. Like that, they have like a whole task force that's just for looking for, pretending to be young 16-year-olds or whatever.
Yep, it's very Do you know, actually, I didn't mention it. The other big risk to a lot of parents, and parents talk to me about this a lot, they're across Facebook and YouTube and WhatsApp and social media and chat rooms and all that, and they understand the risk. A big thing for parents, they don't realize that it's the exact same risk with gaming. So they think because the kid's on an Xbox or PlayStation or they're playing video games, that's just video games. Yes, they don't want them spending hours and they need to sleep and all that stuff, but the risk with online gaming is the exact same. All the games now with the headpiece, connecting, playing live with other people, and predators use gaming because it's a way to connect with the kids. It's very easy to pose as a 15-year-old boy playing Fortnite or Roblox or whatever it is, connecting with another 15-year-old boy. Much easier than chatting and finding things in common by talking. So the amount of predators that use gaming platforms through Xbox, PlayStation, and all the online games It's increasing significantly and much higher than chats and Messenger and Facebook and other social media platforms. So again, don't think just because they're playing a game, that even FIFA, they're playing soccer, basketball, NBA, whatever. The technology these days, they're still having access to psychos out there. Yep. Is there any questions? Any experiences for those that have gone through it? I'm lucky, my kids are still younger, so I don't have as much hands-on experience as some of you may have.
I picked up something on Roblox, which I thought was, majority, predominantly I thought it was safe, but I realized that kids were writing like something, single after like blah 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 in the bio, and then single like it's a hookup platform or something like that. And I just I think my daughter Bella was copying that, and she doesn't even know what she's
doing.
She's just copying. I'm like, why are you writing this on your bio? I'm like, there's dangerous people online, and you need to take that off me. And she just like she changes her name. Her name isn't even the same online. It's just assuming another identity because it's the metaverse and all that stuff. So they can kind of assume whatever identity. It's kind of like role playing, and it fits in with their normal play structure, right? So I think it's important to don't underestimate any platform, no matter how childish you think it is, because that's just another platform for a predator to go through and for them to copy.
100%.
And it's scary, right? Because I thought, why would they write stuff like that in their bio, like it's a dating app or something?
Yeah. And it's about education. If your kid comes and downloads an app, Roblox, whatever, go and look it up. Go do your own research. Talk to other parents. Download the app. Do your own profile. Use the app to see exactly what it is they're doing. We really need to educate ourselves. And it's harder for us. We're older. There's new things every day. We're not as privy to some of this stuff that our kids are. But if they're going to be, engaging in this stuff, we need to know what they're doing. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Cheers.